Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, 1,000 residents have lost their jobs because of DOGE. President Trump's approval rating slips as tariff chaos threatens to tank the economy. And why does Jamie Raskin want D.C. to rejoin Maryland? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We are joined by former County Council member Nancy Floreen and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Approximately 680,000 federal workers reside in D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. On Wednesday, the Metropolitan Council of Governments reported federal employment cutbacks led by DOGE affecting many of these employees. Closer to home in Montgomery County, the county executive reports that approximately 1,000 county residents have lost their federal jobs. Nancy, the county and the states have recognized the personal impact that these reductions in force will have on communities, as well as the collateral impact on county and state budgets. But in difficult economic times like we're in, can the county offer anything more than moral support for the employees who have lost their jobs?
Well, at this point, the difficult economic times that we're in are created by the moron who is in the White House right now. What are we supposed to do? I don't know. I don't think those numbers are accurate. It's not just federal employees that are losing their jobs. It's people with contracts, people working on contracts previously agreed to and approved by the government. All the folks who are like cleaning buildings, all the security people. We haven't begun to determine the impact of all of this. It's largely, I suppose, when unemployment claims get filed, then we'll have a sense of those employees. And remember, people who file for unemployment are supposed to do that where they work, not necessarily where they live. So how that gets sorted out between the District of Columbia and Maryland, we'll have to see. At the end of the day, I'm sure that Montgomery County, every jurisdiction is supportive of its employees, but we've got our own problems to resolve, and the implications of what's happening and coming out of the White House remain unclear because it changes every day. Who knows what he's done today, and who knows what will happen over the weekend. It's a mystery to everybody right now, and that's what's adding to the insecurity out there, the variation in the markets, and of course the fact that we have alienated every relationship we've had with every country pretty much in the world except for Mr. Putin.
Well, Mark, obviously we're looking for a counterpoint here. Supporters of President Trump and the Department of Government Efficiency put forth that the national debt is some $36 trillion and growing by leaps and bounds, and that individually, each American taxpayer owes $323,000 of that debt. Now, as painful as these reductions in force may be, the country can't sustain the debt burden much longer, can it?
No, it can't. And it's worth remembering that in the 90s, leading into the balanced budget that we had at the end of the 90s, Montgomery County and the Washington region went through a similar reduction in the number of federal employees that helped set the stage for reaching that balanced budget. Clearly, though, reducing the number of government employees is not enough. It's going to take a lot more because of the size of the deficit that we're currently dealing with.
Well, Nancy, there are efforts about to try to slow down the process or even defeat the process that President Trump and the DOGE people are doing. Maryland Attorney General Anthony Brown has successfully challenged at the district court level several of these initiatives. But even so, the battle over whether the president has the authority to fire federal workers won't be resolved for months. In the meantime, how should the state government and the county government address these issues?
Well, we're going to talk about the state budget. what they need to do. I mean, there are not a lot of resources available for these folks. The question, as I mentioned earlier, is what's going to happen with respect to unemployment compensation and other sorts of things. It's the irrationality of the process that is upsetting to people, the lack of attention to detail, this full sweep of getting rid of people for no reason, for lying about it. This is the troubling part. And again, as I mentioned, there's no way to predict what's going to happen today or tomorrow. We're only partway through Friday. Gosh knows what the next executive order is going to be.
Well, but to address one of your
Do you propose that we
points,
create a fund to help everybody? And who's going to pay for that? Huh?
Well, that's a great question, but here's the difficulty, Nancy, and I'm going to have Mark address this. Mark, you wrote a very well-written piece about the upcoming off-year election in Virginia, and in which you point out that the Maryland deficit before the DOGE layoffs was $3 billion. And a recent Gonzales poll says that Maryland West Governor Moore has seen his approval rating dip by 6%, leaving Marylanders dispirited. Yet all of that is being offered by the governor and the General Assembly are higher taxes. What else can be done?
Well, I would point out, going on with that article, is that Virginia is in surplus and has had its revenues go beyond what they originally projected. Part of the challenge that we're talking about in Maryland is that Maryland's budget was effectively running on empty already compared with states around us. And that has left us in a much weaker position in order to deal with the challenges that Nancy described. And as a result, we're in a worse shape than the states that surround us.
Well, we're going to talk about the budget deficit after our break. But clearly, there's a lot going on, and there's very strong differences of opinion between what the administration is doing and whether they're doing it appropriately. I mean, one has to feel for our fellow county residents and state residents who may or have lost their jobs, but the reality is we are facing a financial ruin if we don't do something.
I'll just say the thing about budgets is, and the difference between the locals and the states and the feds, is that the states have always had to approve a balanced budget. That is not so for the federal government.
Well,
so we are going to eat whatever we have to eat in terms of reducing expenditures, scrambling to find additional revenue. That's standard. That happens all the time. They're going to have to be cut someplace. There'll probably be increases that they can stomach. We'll see. I don't think anybody's happy about the situation, and it's early. The budget season isn't over, so we'll see.
Well, we will see, and we haven't completely abandoned the situation, but we have to go on to our next topic, which is President Trump's fast-paced administration, as Nancy has talked about, has reshaped the policies domestically and abroad. But Mark, his approval rating has also taken a bit of a hit. It's dipped, but 47% still support him. But the media and some on Wall Street fear economic instability. What's the situation there?
Well, it's interesting to look specifically at the numbers that which policies are popular and which policies are not. So his actions on immigration have been, illegal immigration have been very popular. I think there is considerable unease about the tariff policy. I think there's uncertainty as to whether or not this is intended to be a revenue producer, which it could be, probably at a much lower rate, or is it a negotiating ploy or some combination thereof? And I think that uncertainty that we're dealing with right now is giving a lot of people considerable pause, and it's also affecting financial markets because people in the business community don't know what they're going to be dealing with in 6 months.
Well, it's no surprise, Nancy, that a Gonzales poll here in Maryland shows that President Trump's approval rating is at 36%, with 62% disapproving what is going on. Given Maryland's political landscape, this isn't surprising, is it?
Well, what's surprising to me is that there are 36% of us who think that the kind of behavior that's coming out of the White House is appropriate for the leader, the person who used to be the leader of the free world. We are not that anymore. I mean, they're going after attorneys who've represented people that the moron in the White House have resented. I mean, it's unbelievable. ICE is making raids and taking people without a warrant, revoking their green cards for no reason, whatever. People who were here legally. What is happening to democracy, to free speech? And of course, it's not your fault, you guys. It's what's happening on Capitol Hill.
I think some people.
What happened to people with backbone? Are people so afraid of re-election issues that they are reluctant to say anything? Is there anyone who's going to point out that this person in the White House is clearly beyond the pale?
If I could,
we've got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to let you address that.
I think we're dealing with the filibuster here. Look, the person who you're referencing supported a terrorist group and was promoting anti-Semitic demonstrations. A green card is not an entitlement. It is not a right. I think the U.S. government is entirely within its rights to revoke it and allow the person to go back to another country. That's with prerogative of the Secretary of State. And that's
unbelievable.
That is the legal process.
It is just unbelievable what's happening right now.
Well, I think that's the contrast in opinion that exists between, as we have repeated, President Trump won a plurality of the popular vote, and he won overwhelmingly an electoral college, and he was very clear about the programs and what he was going to put in place. Nancy, isn't this just democracy at work? We have a change of administration, and as Barack Obama said, elections have consequences.
It's an abandonment of fundamental constitutional principles, is what it is, and it's not just the moron in the White House at this point. It's the Senate and the House. As if you ask me, I mean, it's unbelievable. Of course, they've never been able to come to agreement on anything having to do with the budget, but all they do is complain about it. I'm fine with public discourse and debate, and I am fine. Most of us don't have any problems with efforts to reduce the budget. But you do it in a way that's rational. You don't have to do it by having a Tesla sales lot on the White House's lawn. You guys really think that's okay for the President of the United States? Well, we used to have a functional president, but really?
We had a functional president.
Honestly, when you go home and you turn this off, you think that is okay?
I'm going to leave it as a rhetorical question because we have to go to break. And then we will talk about how the county and the state are responding to the changes going on here in our country. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Maryland House Majority Leader David Moon sat before the House Ways and Means Committee and explained to his fellow delegates that his legislative offering calling for a tax on business services was one of desperation. Desperation in the face of a seemingly insurmountable budget deficit that the General Assembly is facing. Delegate Moon was extremely candid when he said that he knew it wasn't a perfect bill or a solution, but he felt that he had to offer something to address the fiscal nightmare on the horizon, recalling the fact that he introduced the same legislation a year ago, it was shot down, and he hadn't originally intended on bringing it back up in this session. 5 hours later, after hundreds of individual Marylanders, business owners, and industry representatives testified that a tax on business services would drive many out of the business, would be reluctantly passed on to Maryland consumers, and many declared that they would move, if the bill was enacted, to neighboring and more friendly jurisdictions. The committee hearing ended. I was in the committee room, and the gloom set over the committee room. Nancy, Governor Moore and the General Assembly have proposed higher taxes on top earners, closing corporate loopholes, a highway use fee for electric vehicles, increased taxes on goods and services, lowering the estate tax exemption. At what point will Marylanders push back on this?
Well, these are acts of desperation. No question about it. I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to have to make some serious cuts somewhere. And I'm sure they're worrying about that right now. What is it going to do to education? That's probably a huge issue for them all. And how are they going to manage other kinds of commitments? I don't see any easy way out for them. And I understand why they're asking all their analysts, what can we do? What can we do? What could we do that will hurt the people the least? I don't know, what would you do?
Well, here's the conundrum, and is that the House of Delegates, passed the education budget without the cuts that even the modest cuts that the governor was requesting. Mark, what if the House of Delegates doesn't take it seriously? What's going to happen?
Well, I was going to make it precisely that point, which is that the governor made proposals, frankly, very modest reductions in the blueprint, and even those were not adopted by the legislature. This is a problem of their own making. I mean, they can wring their hands about tough choices and how difficult it is for them, but this is a problem that they created that other states aren't facing because they haven't done what Maryland has done. Because of the legislatures being so beholden to the teachers union in continuing to push forward with the blueprint, Maryland is going into a fiscal doom loop, a doom loop which is driving business away from the state, is driving high earners away from the state, and will continue to create financial problems for the state, not just this year, but well into the future when the revenues that are anticipated don't produce the results, or the capital gains from the stock market don't produce the results that high earners provide. And it really is a catastrophe that is of the General Assembly's making.
Well, it's a very difficult thing. Nancy?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think they have all the numbers yet either. I mean, what was it? Hopkins is laying off 1,000 people or more because of the reduction in federal grants. What is that going to mean across the state? They're talking about cuts to defense. Additional hits aren't factored in yet because nobody still knows what's going to come out of the federal budget cuts. So they have no room for maneuver, that's for sure. And I'm sure their information is not. They can't predict what's going to happen today and tomorrow, but I'm sure by the time they pass the budget, they're still not going to know what the ultimate hits in employment are across the state of Maryland. And,
well,
we can never be sure, but now we'll
I guess
see.
That's the question. What happens if we reach, the end of the General Assembly and they haven't balanced the budget?
Well, they're going to have to do something.
That's what it has to be by the end of the legislative session, correct?
I mean, they could call a special session or something. It's not going to fix the problem. It's probably only going to get worse. It's a very, very, very difficult time for them. And the unpredictability and chaos of the marketplace is another problem. They got retirement funds. They've got all kinds of funds invested that they are going to have to worry about the returns on as well. They have fixed obligations that they don't have. That there's not a lot of room for maneuvering here. So it's going to be a nightmare. I always used to say the good thing about here, this area, is that it was a company town and the company isn't going anywhere. And that was that we were the home to so many federal facilities. But apparently, that just goes to show you never assume anything. That's no longer the case. They're making the company smaller, reducing jobs, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that and focus on I'm not disagreeing with you folks about the business side of things, which is something, frankly, that this region hasn't had to do so much because we had a big company here.
Well, we had some
So,
stability. We had
we'll see.
stability and a backstop. Mark.
Yeah.
Well, one of my observations was going to be that David Moon has, I think, learned from Donald Trump in his ability to engage in distraction. He's done this over a period of times of proposing a variety of tax increases that kind of grab a lot of attention. And remember, he did that last year. And it kind of has a way of, how shall I say, spreading the opposition across the board. And it becomes a kind of distraction to, I think, ultimately what will be the a tax package that the General Assembly passes.
Well, I will say that I sat through that 5 hours of those hearings. There were all walks of life that presented their opposition to a tax on business services. But at the same time, if Delegate Moon is correct, he estimates that it'll be about $1.2 billion in revenue that will come in from such a tax. And as the lobbyists that my trade association, the Maryland Land Title Association, works with, said this bill has legs because of the financial uncertainty that the legislature is in. So there could be some kind of, the hotel people, oh my gosh, the hotel people were just, sickened by the thought. My industry gets affected because everything we do is subcontracted out to a contractor, whether it's an abstractor, a surveyor, somebody. There'll be an additional fee added on, and that just gets layered on back to the general public when they do a transaction. So it's an intractable problem. And Nancy, everybody, we all three agree this is a big issue. Now, I know we only have 3 minutes left, and I just wanted to. I like these lighter topics at the end of a show when we've chewed things up. And according to a recent Axios report, Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin suggested to Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser that the district consider retrocession, the process of rejoining Maryland instead of pursuing statehood. Now, Nancy, I can imagine that Governor Moore called up Congressman Raskin and said, dude, what are you doing to me? I've got a $3.5 billion deficit. I don't need another $1 billion problem. What do you think?
I don't know. Jamie is a history buff, and he looked up what happened in 1846 when, Virginia took Alexandria back so that they could continue their very profitable slave trade over there. There's history to this. They've been arguing about this issue. I looked up the history. I hadn't appreciated that this is not a new conversation that has occurred over the years. I don't think it has any legs, but we feel bad for the district insofar as they can't. They're stuck. They're completely stuck. And, they're going to lose a bunch of police officers with a budget, continuation of the budget as it is. And, they're going to have to tighten their belts like anybody else, and they have no say in it. So that's going to be, that's tough for them. I don't know that it would be any better being part of Maryland.
I got to give Mark the last word.
Well, it raises an interesting constitutional issue because of the 23rd Amendment, which gives electoral college votes to DC. So the question, I'm sure a law professor former law professor like Jamie appreciates is what happens to, I guess it would be a reduction of 2 Democratic electoral votes going forward, because you'd have to figure out a way of unwinding the 23rd Amendment. Otherwise, you'd be giving a bonus electoral college votes to Maryland in some way.
Well, I agree with Nancy. That's the reason I put it in. I don't think it's going anywhere. But it's always interesting to hear an out of the box solution to the district statehood issue. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Well, I just want to acknowledge the fine work of Adam Pajuccio and Montgomery Perspective, who pointed out this week the challenges that various rent regulations are creating in effectively making Montgomery County uninvestable for new housing construction.
Nancy Floreen, your parting shot.
Well, I would say this. I'm not a big fan of marchers and protests. But I am a big fan of trying to support organizations and people in need. So my little contribution has been to sign up to give blood at NIH. So anybody feeling the need to participate in our community and the federal community in a positive way, I urge you to give that some thought. It's not so hard. It's very convenient. The people are very nice, and you do a good thing.
Thank you, Nancy. I want to thank you both, Mark and Nancy, for being here today. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.